Always Mine by SamadiW. Chapter 16, Part 1. 3 years later. "Run, come on!" Harry yelled urgently over the sound of thunder. The sky darkened and a slight drizzle fell upon them, and a dazzling bright blue light blurred their vision. They hurriedly ran up the empty cobbled street. Harry ducked another curse, aimed straight at him. The second Ron reached his side, he cursed at the hooded man and leaned flat against the wall closest to the alley. They were hopelessly outnumbered. Harry heard the sound of heavy footsteps. His breathing hastened. He didn't know whether it was a friend or a foe. Clutching their wands tightly, Harry nodded at Ron and moved his head a fraction around the corner to get a better look. There was a bellowing of black ropes as oars apparated around them. Draco rushed up the alley with his wand pointed threateningly. Harry visibly relaxed after seeing the pale-faced man. Without hesitation, the ex-Slytherin pointed it at the retreating men and yelled, "Reducto!" The adjoining wall crumbled and fell on the dark wizards, trapping them underneath. An eerie silence followed, pierced by the deafening sound of thunder. Harry and Ron joined straight out of Hogwarts and were well on their way to becoming highly skilled aurors. Draco joined the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and worked his way up quickly to head the smaller divisions. The wizards around him had reservations about working with the former Death Eater, but he gained their trust and respect over time. He still had the passion and skill to be a full-time auror and accompanied Harry and Ron on low-level missions. Even they had been impressed by Draco's mastery of the wand and occlumency. It was an important skill to possess during interrogation. Draco threw himself into work and furthering his education. It kept him focused and occupied. Besides work, he also had his vast Malfoy estate and family business to manage, but his achievements at the Ministry were his own, and not credited to his infamous ancestry. Since his father's cancer diagnosis and steadily deteriorating health, Draco was forced to take up the reins and assist his mother in any way necessary. Except for occasional outbursts between Weasley and himself, the three ex-enemies maintained a cordial and professional relationship. They didn't speak of Hogwarts, kept out of each other's way, and most importantly, none ever mentioned Hermione. Draco itched to ask how she was every time he saw her best friends. Or even where she was. The woman had disappeared completely. He was convinced she was well and safe. That was enough to appease his troubled mind. Not a day went by that he did not think about her. She occupied his thoughts daily. The talented Miss Hermione Granger had disappeared from the magical world. It was a waste for a witch of her caliber not to reach for the stars. Glancing at the richly embossed card, Draco smiled. The card smelled of money and finery. Blazoned Astoria. After their forced engagement, Astoria had done everything possible to get him to love her, but it seemed impossible. They had played the couple as their parents and she had forced upon him. They had attended the events, luncheons, and dinner parties with their pictures appearing in every known wizarding magazine with suggestive headlines. She was with the Malfoy heir. After all, it was expected, and Lucius Malfoy was feared, respected, and despised. Nothing would make Draco glance her way, and he merely regarded her as an annoyance. She tried provocative clothes, giving herself to him openly, but they were futile attempts to entice a man who had given his heart to another. Draco was not interested, and worse, he wouldn't touch her, let alone share the same bed. Her heart had broken at his blatant and cruel refusal that she broke off their engagement a year after Hogwarts. A life of misery was not what she had hoped for. It was the first time Astoria had seen him smile at her genuinely. They had truly spoken about everything that happened and connected as friends, and that's exactly what they were now. Good friends who relied on each other in need. Draco always knew Blaise had a soft spot for the Slytherin girl, and at his insistence they had gone out on a day, and they were smitten. In all ways they complemented each other, much like how Hermione was to him. Inseparable soon after, Blaise proposed 7 months into the relationship. Theo dated Luna. They lived together in eternal and quirky bliss. His friends were doing well and forever trying to get him to date. He gave various excuses and got out of each blind date. Once you find that perfect fit for you, it wasn't easy to replace it with another. Lucius had, of course, been livid about the broken engagement. He raged and accused. The man cared about no one but himself. No longer a teenager who would bend to his father's will, Draco stood his ground firmly and left the manor for good. Lucius knew better than to try and belittle his son any more. Having the capability to turn his father into liquid goo with a flick of his wand was a good advantage. After weeks of searching, he found a lavishly furnished flat in downtown London. The muggle surroundings calmed and intrigued him. He wandered around independently and took in the bookshops and the coffee shops. In next to no time, Draco adapted to his new surroundings with finesse. Money was never an issue. Being a Malfoy had certain perks, and his job paid well. His phone buzzed. He reached over, clicked on the message, and groaned. Theo had sent him another picture of a scantily clothed woman with big tits, and the caption, "If you don't shag soon, your pecker will fall off." Draco laughed, pulled a report towards him, and flipped through it unenthusiastically. He read through the fine print and massaged the bridge of his nose. They needed to tie up the loose strings on the black market potion ring that seemed to be popping up everywhere. A whiff of silver mist distracted him from his work, and he narrowed his eyes. A silver Patronus appeared before him. It was his mother's Persian cat. "Son, you are wanted at St. Mungo's urgently. It's your father." Draco frowned at where the cat disappeared. He had better things to do, but collected his coat and paraded to St. Mungo's. His mother needed him. For her, he would always be there. The black robes he wore billowed behind him as he made his way to the reception. A burly healer spoke to him. "Patient's name?" But before he could reply, Narcissa appeared and hugged him tightly. She had been crying. Her eyes were blotchy and fresh tears fell on her face. Draco held his mother to his chest until the sobs subsided. He felt no emotion. He felt nothing. A gaping void existed in his life. He would take it to his grave. Draco entered the room to find his father lying in a very comfortable bed, the best money could buy. The man before him was a mere shadow of the once imposing Lucius Malfoy. His leathery skin was stretched over bones that stuck out abnormally, and his face was far too pale. The once luscious platinum-blonde locks were but a distant memory. He was bald with a visible red blotch that adorned his scalp. Lucius stared at his son through haunted eyes. Reaching out, he touched the sleeve of the healer closest to him and muttered incoherently. The man gave a curt nod and left the room. Even in his father's weakened state, Draco hated being alone with him. He had no fond memories of the man except violence, unhappiness, and deep despair. Lucius struggled to speak. "Draco, his cancer has eaten away my body. I'm very near to death. I know you feel no love or compassion for me, but you are my son." Draco looked at the man before him, unable to speak. Only on one's deathbed do we feel remorse for the horrendous deeds done, and Lucius Malfoy drowned in them. What the fuck did he want from him? He said coldly, his face void of emotion, "I will look after Mother better than you ever did." Lucius' eyes rolled back in his head. A coughing fit took over, and blood spewed out of his mouth. A few drops landed on Draco's white shirt sleeve. He eyed it in mild interest. Blood purity had been important to his father, but they all bled crimson. Lucius held onto his son's arm pleasingly and moved his lips almost inaudibly. "Forgive me, son. his hand fell, and Lucius Malfoy was no more. Draco stared at his dead father. A man who had brought death, destruction, and unhappiness to so many people. It seemed fitting that he died as he did, suffering and unloved. With a solemn face, Draco left the room and informed the healer outside that his father passed. They moved into the room and covered the body with a conjured white sheet. His mother seemed inconsolable. She held on to her son and cried. Draco never understood her blinding love for a man who abused her and belittled her daily. Once he attended to a tedious paperwork at St. Mungo's, Draco sidelong apparated with Narcissa back to the manor. He instructed the house elves to monitor and look after his mother until his return. Satisfied that his mother was tended to, he returned to the ministry to resume work. Harry looked up in interest as Draco stopped in front of him. The ice blonde adjusted his tie and spoke. "My father's dead. I need a few days to put his affairs in order." Took a deep breath and added, without emotion, "If you need me, send it out to the manor." Harry exchanged a grave look with Ron, and they rose to offer their condolences. Draco raised a hand, stopped them, and hissed. "He deserved to die. He took too long to die." They looked at him in understanding. Lucius Malfoy was the devil incarnate. A violent, disgusting man who used power and money to get his way. He would not be missed. Draco entered his office, locked the door, and stared at the ceiling in deep thought. After a few minutes, he opened the desk drawer and took out the picture. It was a picture he had taken everywhere with him. He touched the moving figures. Hermione smiled adoringly at him, while he held her close and kissed her nose. She was the only one to love him for who he was, despite his past mistakes, and he had lost her for good. He hung his head. She deserved a better man than him. He had made his peace with that. The 3 days that followed were surreal. Draco stood loyally by Narcissa's side, holding her hand and unmoving. If he was being honest, he wished for his father's death 3 years ago, and it came too late. A slew of shady-looking wizards and witches paid their respects. Prominent members of the wizarding world, including the Minister of Magic, offered their condolences. Draco was now the head of the manor. It was a title he never asked for, but had been forced upon him, along with its many privileges and heavy burden. The senior Malfoy's arrangements and funeral done, mother and son sat drinking tea in their lavish living room. He looked around the vast room in disgust. The place reeked of his late father. Darkness and misery lurked in every corner, and he decided to redecorate as soon as possible and made a mental note to mention it to his mother shortly. Draco placed his hand over Narcissa's and gently spoke. "Mother?" She snapped out of her daze at the sound of his voice and turned to face him. He bared his teeth and spat. "You are finally free. He can't hurt you anymore." Narcissa smiled weakly. She wept for her husband, but he was a conniving bastard. She was immensely proud that Draco was nothing like him, and of the man her son was becoming. Narcissa tenderly touched his face. "He hurt you far worse than he ever hurt me." She looked deep into his eyes and pressed. "You need to find your happiness." When his face fell, she added, "You still love Miss Granger. I can see it in your eyes." Draco kissed his mother's hand. "She has disappeared, Mother, and deserves far better than the likes of me." Narcissa shook her head with tears in her eyes. "Don't give up. True love always finds a way." They shared a smile and drank the rest of the tea in silence. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this part of Always Mine by SamadiW. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.